In this lesson, we're going to keep using identities to manipulate equations, but now we're going to do something called verifying identities. So let's review what an identity is. We have a conditional equation. A conditional equation is true only under the condition that x equals a certain number. An identity is true for all values of x, all real values of x. And when we verify an identity, we will change one side until it looks like the other side, and then we've proven the identity. Whenever you see verify, then make sure you only change one side. We can't multiply both sides by the denominator or anything like that. Okay, so let's still use our short list of identities. If we see a cosecant squared, let's keep in mind that we might want to use 1 plus tan squared is not 1 plus tan squared. 1 plus cotan squared is cosecant squared. We have a cosine, so let's keep in mind that cosine x is 1 over secant. And also with cosecant, we have 1 over sine. We don't know which one we're going to use. We'll just try some of them. And so we're looking at cosecant squared minus 1 and cosecant squared minus 1. We could make this have this appear in it. So I'm going to subtract 1. That would be cosecant squared minus 1 is cotangent squared. So I took this and I rewrote it. And everywhere we see this, we can replace it with that. So this gets replaced with cotangent squared. And we're trying to simplify that and make it look like that. We have cotangent, cosecant. Let's go ahead and change this into sines and cosines. So cotangent, we didn't write this down earlier. Cotangent is cosine over sine. So now we could say this is going to be cosine over sine squared. Cotangent is cosine over sine, and we have cosecant is 1 over sine. So we have cosecant. Maybe we can do something better than that. This is in the denominator. We could use this, or we can use sine x is 1 over cosecant x. Because right here, I took the cotangent out in front. This is 1 over cosecant x squared. And the cotangent is there. Cosecant is 1 over cosecant. And we see that 1 over cosecant is sine. This turned into a sine and it's squared. Sine squared. And now cosine squared equals cosine squared. And we're done because we made the left side look like the right side. All right, make a list of identities that you might need and pause the video, try that one on your own. Now let's work on the left side, make it look like the right side. So if I see secant squared, 1 plus tan squared is secant squared. There's a cotangent squared, so we could have 1 plus cotangent squared is cosecant squared. And we also have secant 1 over cosine. Cotangent is 1 over tangent. Cotangent is cosine over sine. And we have to turn that into a cotangent, so it looks like we might have enough to do that. Secant squared is 1 plus tan squared, so I'm going to replace that. Cotangent squared is cosecant squared minus 1. All right, then we're trying to make all this turn into a cotangent squared, and it's looking like it's a little complicated. So we start over. And maybe think ahead. We have a secant. That can get us to a cosine. We have a cotangent, and that can get us to a cosine over sine. So let's try that. We're going to change that into 1 over cosine. Cotangent will be cosine over sine. And also, if you weren't able to do this on your own and you see a hint, like you see, oh, from here you can finish, then go ahead and pause and try it on your own for practice. So we'll cancel that. We have 1 over, and that's squared. So we have 1 over sine squared. And 1 over sine squared is cosecant squared. We see cotangent, cosecant, cotangent, cosecant. So cosecant squared minus 1, cosecant squared minus 1 is equal to cotangent squared. All of this is cotangent squared, and we're done. Try that one. Let's work on the right side. Usually it's easier to work on something that's bigger, to make it smaller, to look like something that's small over here. So we're going to work on the right side, make a list of possible identities, and try a few. Pause the video. So we see cosecant and cotangent. We might need that. We might need this. And we have cosecant is 1 over sine. When you have two things that are added together, we can get a common denominator. So let's try that. And we have to multiply this by this. And we have to multiply this by this. So we'll have that in the numerator. Then we're going to have this in the other numerator. And in the denominator will be cosecant squared. It'll have a negative or minus cotangent squared. And then the middle term will cancel because we have a negative cotangent cosecant, positive cotangent cosecant, so that middle term is gone. Cosecant squared minus cotangent squared. Let's see where that fits in here. Cosecant squared minus cotangent squared equals 1. So this denominator is 1. We also have negative cotangent, positive cotangent, and we're done. Because the denominator is 1, cosecant plus cosecant is 2 cosecant. And this letter, Greek letter, is called alpha. So we have something similar here. Pause the video and try this one. If we have cosine and sine, we need to go to secant. Well, maybe we need cosine is 1 over secant. We might need cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. And let's just see if that's enough. So we have the addition of two rational expressions, and we're going to need a common denominator. And we need to multiply to get a common denominator. So we have to multiply this side by this. Let's multiply this side by this. If we distribute this, we'll have cosine minus sine cosine. Cosine alpha minus sine cosine. Here we're going to have cosine plus cosine sine. The denominator is going to have 1 minus sine squared in the numerator. We have negative sine cosine, positive sine cosine. So this equals 0, 2 cosine, and then 1 minus sine squared. Up here we see 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. And then we have, we can reduce this. There's a cosine and cosine squared in the denominator, so we have this canceling that. We have 2 over cosine, and we know that cosine is 1 over secant. So this will turn into 2 over 1 over secant. And if we divide by the fraction, we'll get 2 secant is 2 secant. All right, try that one, pause the video, and I would work on this side. You could work on either side. I'm going to work on this side. Never mind, I'm going to work on that side. All right, so we see sine, cosine, cosecant, cotangent. Let's think of what we might need. And we have a cosecant, cotangent. So when you make this list, maybe there's some that we forget, but we'll just, it's a way to get started. So let's work on that side. And when you see a 1 plus cosine, 1 minus cosine, you can create a Pythagorean identity. That's not squared. So we're just multiplying numerator and denominator by the same thing. So now we have sine plus sine cosine. I'm going to leave it like this. And that'll be a 1 minus cosine squared. Here we have 1 minus cosine squared. I didn't write down the Pythagorean identity, but sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. And we can see 1 minus cosine squared. If you subtract cosine squared, you know that it equals sine squared. This is sine squared. And we have sine canceling one of the signs down here. Then we can separate this, 1 over sine and cosine over sine. And that will finish. 1 over sine is cosecant. Cosine over sine is cotangent. And we could work on either side. We could use the same strategy as the previous problem by working on the left side. So pause the video and try that one. Here are some identities we might need. Secant Maybe we need a cotangent. And maybe we need this cotangent identity. Secant and tangent, those are related with a Pythagorean identity. So let's see if that works. If we have secant plus 1, and we need to get secant squared minus 1 down here, we can multiply that to create a Pythagorean identity. And also remember that if you have addition in the denominator, we can't break this up into tangent over secant plus tangent over 1. That doesn't work. It's only if we have one term in the denominator, and then we can split the expression like that. So let's multiply by secant minus 1. So secant times secant, secant squared. 1 times negative 1, negative 1. And the middle term cancels. Positive secant minus secant is 0. Secant squared minus 1 is over here. We have secant squared minus 1 equals tangent squared if we subtract 1. So wherever you see this, you get to replace it with that. So now that is tan squared we get to cancel secant minus 1 tangent since we have one thing in the denominator, we can split it like that. And this is cotangent. This, maybe it's hard to see that it's going to be cosecant. We can change these into sines and cosines. So that'll be secant is 1 over cosine. Tangent is sine over cosine. And then if you don't see what's happening here, we have cosine is the numerator times the reciprocal of the denominator. So now we have 1 over sine is cosecant, and we're done because it's cosecant. And that's it for today.